So today we're watching Polyglot Explains how to become conversational in any language. And as a fellow polyglot myself, I can speak 3 languages fluently and 5 conversationally, like +2. So yeah, let's see what tips he has in these videos.
In this video, it's my goal to get you from having absolutely no language knowledge to becoming conversational as fast as possible.
Alright, let's
Hi,
see what
I'm
you got.
Tiger, and I've been learning languages for the last 10 years across 3 different
Alright,
languages.
Tiger,
And
let's see what you
today,
got.
I want to teach you my 5-step approach to learning any language. By the end of this video, you'll know how to go from complete zero to getting reactions like this.
Okay, let's see.
VR チャットで一番うまいと思う。全然日本人としていけると思います。
Wow, 日本語上手。
10个月左右。
10个月。
10 months for Chinese is kind of crazy. 10 months for Chinese is kind of crazy.
中国人他一开始开嘴的时候，我也是。
Learning a language isn't easy, but if you take
Yeah,
it seriously
definitely
and
not
stick
easy.
with me until the end of this video, I'll give you the tools you need to succeed. Alright, so in this video, I'll be using Japanese, Chinese, and Korean as examples since that's what I'm most familiar with. But what I teach you today
I
can
can
be
speak
applied to any
conversational
language
Japanese
you're interested in
and I can
learning.
read in Korean.
What really matters
Nothing in
is that
Chinese
you're
though.
putting in the consistent time and effort and are actually following the steps that I outline in this video.
Yeah,
A lot of advice
consistency is
that I
so
give in this
important.
video won't be what you expect, so make sure to watch all of the steps even if you're more advanced. But with that said, let's get on to the first step, which is learning the writing system. Depending on the language you're trying to learn, you might have different challenges to face. For example, with Japanese, you have 3 different alphabets to
Oh
wrestle
yeah.
with. In Korean, you have patsim and combination pronunciation rules. Something like French might be spelling with many silent letters. And with Chinese, it's just like the whole language. For example, this word in French means bird, and it's pronounced, what?
Oiseau.
Wazo? This is pronounced wazo? Like, what?
What's the...
Anyway, I'm putting the writing system first because I do think it is
But
definitely important.
how did
But
it come
actually, if
to
your
us?
goal is to become conversational as fast as possible, then you'll be getting diminishing returns from spending a lot of time on this step. So my advice is actually something a lot of people won't tell you, but in the beginning, I'd recommend not spending too much time studying the writing system and just focus on learning the bare bones of what you need to know. For example, with Japanese, just learn how to read Romaji and Hiragana and Katakana optionally. For Chinese, you should learn Pinyin since learning the whole character writing system would take you like 10 years. Of course, you can spend more time on these steps if you enjoy it,
But it's
for
not
me,
necessary.
when I first start learning a new language, I want to progress as fast as possible, so I try to learn no more than necessary on this step.
Facts.
I'm recommending learning to speak as fast as possible because to stay consistent and improve with the language, I found that it's key to have fun with it. And in my personal experience, there's nothing more satisfying and motivating than getting to use what you've learned with real people having real conversations. Once you get to the point of being able to speak with others, maintenance and motivation become much easier in my
Oh
experience.
yeah, that's so.
And I think
that's
once
so
you become
fucking
more
fun.
familiar
So
with the
peak.
language and are sure that you're interested in learning it, it'll be easy to go back and learn more advanced things like kanji later. But I do think it's important that you understand at least the basics of the writing system, since this will help you take notes in the future, and most researchers you find out there online will use these principles to teach you. I wouldn't spend more than a couple days for Hangul or Pinyin, and maybe a week or 2 for Hiragana.
Oh yeah. So for Hangul, I actually learned it really quick. Like, if you want me to make a video on that, how I learned Hangul so quick, like, if I'm not wrong, I think I spent around 6 hours, just like 6 hours straight, just like cramming the shit out of. So like, yeah, if you want me to make a video on how I did that, I'll be more than happy to do it. But like, yeah, Hangul is really easy to learn.
Plus katakana optionally. And there's actually an extra bonus part of this step, which I'll come back to later. But for now, let's move on to the next step. Okay, so once you understand how your target language is written at a basic level, I would move on to grammar. Before you click off this video just because you don't like grammar, please hear me out. Trust me, it's crucial. If you
I
want to
actually
become
found
fluent or
grammar
even conversational in a language, you
fairly
need to be able to
easy.
make sentences that you've never heard before, you've never read anywhere before. So being able to say what you want to say, when you want to say it, and how you want to say it, if you want to do those things, you're going to need grammar. And it's not necessarily as intimidating as it might seem. Every time I start a new language, I simply start by learning my self-introduction. By learning your self-introduction, not only are you learning some phrases that you absolutely will need to use when you're talking to others, but you'll also learn many fundamental aspects of learning the language. What's different about how I approach self-introductions is that I'm not just learning them to learn the phrase. I'm looking to use the phrases in my self-introduction as a starting point for what grammar I should be learning in the language. I'm going to get a bit detailed here and go through my process step by step because I want you to have clear, actionable steps you can follow and not just some kind of vague hand-waving, yeah, learn something like this, I guess. For example, let me show you what I would do if I was learning Japanese from scratch. The first thing I would do is just look up something like how to say my name is in Japanese. I would then look for a page that breaks down the meaning for each word like this. You can see here that it clearly explains each part of the phrase.
Yeah, that's
We don't want something like this where it's just a bunch of words and then a fill in the blank
No,
without
that's
any
true.
explanation. Because if our goal is to become fluent or conversational in the language, we should really try our best to understand how the language works and not just some set phrases. Once we have something like this where each part of the phrase is broken
No, that's like very important to, especially. I don't know if this is simply with Japanese, but yeah, knowing like the particles and like knowing sentence structure will help you so much. Even if your vocabulary isn't that good, yes, then all you really need to do, which I think is easier, if you learn the grammar first and then you like start like spamming by learning a lot of like vocabulary, because the grammar points and the particulars are always gonna be there, and then you can just change that out by like all of the words that you've learned.
down, we can then see that there are some things that we're not familiar with, like in English. We have this no thing here, and we have this wa and des thing as well. So we can just do some Google searching, like what is no possessive particle in Japanese. So it took me like less than a minute to find a page here which explains the possession particle no in Japanese. And soon after I found a page here that explains the wa and des combination for Japanese as well. And from reading these two articles, we can learn that the particle no is basically the equivalent of apostrophe s in Japanese. And from the second article, we can learn that a wa b des is the grammatical framework to say a is b. So from just this one simple sentence, we now have the tools to make hundreds of phrases like this.
You know that. Oh, that means. Damn, his like pronunciation is really good.
I hope I don't get copyright strike for that. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you approach learning your self-introduction by breaking down each
Nice
phrase into
pronunciation,
its
really good.
individual parts, it'll be a lot more time efficient because you're not just learning one phrase, but you're learning the framework for infinitely many phrases. For example, let's look at a more complicated but very common and everyday phrase. その何百匹もの魚を使って小さな子供を襲っている女の子は怖いです。
How's that a normal situation?
So we can see right here that the sentence is using the no particle that we learned earlier. And if we look right here at this section here, we can see that it's using both the wa and des form right here as well. So those are both the grammars that we learned earlier. And this wa and des is actually modifying this whole section right here. So it's really important that you learn this no grammar here and also this wa des grammar here. So using this method, I would learn all the phrases from my self-introduction, learning all the different phrases. Additionally, I'd learn the 6 W's, who, what, where, when, why, how. Yeah, sure, that counts as a W too. So I learned how to ask and answer questions in this format. Though I'll admit, when going through Google, sometimes it's hard to find articles that are explained well. So if you're having a hard time finding an article that breaks down the grammar clearly, I'd recommend putting the phrase into ChatGPT and it can break down the sentence for you. Then from there, you can look up the specifics about certain grammar points and just be careful to double check anything ChatGPT says about the grammar because it can explain it completely wrong. But it's good at pointing out what grammar exists within the phrase. And you can use that information to look up how the grammar works using more reliable sources like grammar guides. Outside of AI, you could also look into some beginner textbooks and legit just go through it cover to cover. And by the time you finish, you should have a decent grammar foundation to start with. When I was learning Chinese, for example, I went through
I don't really use textbooks, I used to use
HSK2 textbooks, which only took about 1 or 2 weeks to get through, and then I was ready to start talking with natives. But I think the phrase learning method is really good since it makes the task a lot less daunting and more fun, and it's very easy to see like clear progress as you go. I guess the summary of this step is just to be curious about what you're learning and try really to understand why and how the phrases you're learning work. Would you? Okay, so at this point, you've learned the basics of the writing system, and you've learned about the fundamental grammar. So the next part of my approach would be actually using what you've learned to practice speaking with natives.
Yes.
This might be one of the hardest steps for a lot of people, but I also think it's the most important. Because I think that speaking really requires you to own the language so that you really understand it inside and out and can bend it to your will, so to speak. Maybe it's kind of a hardcore way to start, but if you're really serious about this and willing to do what it takes, I can't recommend this step enough. Of course, I think that in order to really learn a language, it's important to approach it from all angles and not just from speaking. There's a place for listening and reading and writing, of course. But I think that speaking is one of the steps that is often put off the most and is one of the main things preventing people from getting to that next
because
level
we're afraid of making mistakes and
because doing
silly
language
and
exchanges
all
really
that.
can be scary, and it requires a lot of courage and bravery, similar to public speaking in my opinion. For my first few years of learning Japanese, I avoided speaking, and it was honestly one of the biggest regrets I have in my language learning journey. And I didn't see any significant progress in Japanese until I decided to just try and start speaking with Japanese people and not worry about what other people thought or about making mistakes. When it comes to language learning, I know it can be really scary to make mistakes, but I honestly think it's one of the fastest ways to improve. So it's not a bad thing at all, and it's just a natural part of the process of getting better. So please don't let the fear of making mistakes prevent you from practicing speaking. So once I started to speak more often, I combined that with the rest of the steps I'm going to tell you in this video, and I found that I improved quite quickly and consistently, which led me to where I am today. If there's nothing else you take away from this video, it should be, please try to practice speaking as soon as you can. In terms of finding a language partner, there are a lot of different apps out there, so I can't recommend
I think you went from
one, but you can do some research on what
N5
apps
to
there are out there and try one that
N4
might be
in
a
like,
good fit for you.
no, not N4
It
to
can be a really
N5.
helpful resource
I got from
because,
like
for example, if you're learning
N4 to like
Japanese, they can get you in
N3
contact
and
with a
like,
Japanese person
what
who
is
wants
it
to
like?
learn English. And this
Oh,
works for
like
any language,
a
not just Japanese.
month or
My only
two?
disclaimer is that
Something
you will
like
be
that.
talking to strangers, and some people might use the apps for things other than language learning, so do be careful. But the vast majority of people that I've met have been genuinely good people just interested in learning languages, so I definitely think the language exchange apps are worth giving a try. If you're having a hard time with the apps, there are also various Discord servers that you can use for finding language partners as well. Once you found a partner, you can try to talk with them using whatever knowledge you've learned so far. You can give yourself an introduction, and they might ask you some questions about yourself, and you can do your best to answer them. At this point comes a very important step. Sooner or later, you're going to reach a point where you don't know how to say something. Maybe you don't know the word and how to translate it from your native language to your target language, or you know the words, but you don't know the grammar to convey your feelings. In the moment, it might feel a little bit awkward at first, but this is actually exactly what we want. Because once this happens, you'll know exactly what you need to work on. You can just ask your language exchange partner to tell you the word or how to say the whole phrase, and they'll be happy to tell you. I'd recommend asking them to actually type it out for you, so you have a chat log of all the different words and phrases you didn't know during the conversation. I don't recommend asking natives to explain their own grammar, because most don't understand it at all, or they might teach you incorrectly. So I'd recommend...
No, true. That's why whenever I ask like my Japanese roommate, like, how do you explain this grammar? He's like, I don't know, man. I just picked it up. Do not ask a native speaker how to explain their own language. They'll be like, I don't know, man. It kind of just works.
If you have a question about the grammar, just tell them what you want to say and have them send you the whole sentence, and that sentence will contain the grammar that you need to study. And you can then use some more reliable resources like grammar guides to help you. And basically, at the end of your conversation, you'll have all these phrases you can work with, and using what we learned in step 2, we can take each one of these phrases and learn a lot from each one. Yeah, if you've done this step correctly, by the time your language exchange is over, you should have a chat log that looks like this, and this will be exactly what you need for the next step. Once you've gathered a list of words and grammar from your language exchange, the next step is to learn and memorize them. This is a great way to build your vocabulary, especially in the intermediate stage, because you'll be focusing only on words and phrases you've actually encountered in real conversations. As you progress in your language learning, textbooks tend to introduce vocabulary that you rarely use, like postal stamps or international relations. And
that's true.
I've literally never had to use either of these words or many of the words that I learned in my textbook. So even though learning vocabulary
Duolingo,
by
I'm
going
looking
out
at
and
you.
trying to talk to people might take a bit more time, but I think it's worth it because when you're trying to remember vocabulary, it'll be a lot easier to stay motivated because you'll know that the words that you're learning are genuinely useful.
Yeah.
For memorization, I highly recommend a flashcard app with spaced repetition. Spaced repetition
gonna
is
say
just a
Anki,
system
right?
where you review cards more frequently the worse you are at them. There are plenty of flashcard apps out there, and I'm not sponsored or anything, but I've personally been using Anki since I first started learning languages.
Yep.
I've never had any
Everyone says
problems with
Anki.
it, and
I
it's
don't
done everything
use
I
it,
needed
by
to
the way.
do,
I use
so it
something
gets my
else.
recommendation. On Android and on the web, it's free, but on iOS, it does cost money. So long as your app has spaced
One more reason why
repetition, you
Apple
could probably just use
sucks.
a different app
I'm
that has
just
the
kidding.
system, and you should be
Or
fine.
am I?
So this brings me to my final step, which is synthesis. So this is like reviewing your flashcards, double checking and practicing any grammar you learned, writing down any questions you might have for your language exchange partner next time you call, and practicing pronunciation. This leads me to my bonus tip from step 1. My tip is to get familiar with some of the pronunciation rules for your language. For example, in Korean, some of the sounds might change depending on which characters are next to each other. For example, with consonant assimilation in Korean, a beginner might call this 잘해, but it would actually be pronounced 잘해. With Japanese, you have silent U sounds like in the word des or ski. And in Chinese, you have tone sandy, which results in this not being pronounced as bu yao, but instead it's pronounced as bu yao. So certain rules like these would be good to learn in the beginning so that you aren't forming bad habits for pronunciation, which can be a real pain to unlearn in the future. Pronunciation is such a big topic that I'm planning to make a dedicated video for it, so if you don't want to miss that when it comes out, please consider subscribing. But in terms of general review, one of the struggles a lot of people have is finding ways to do it consistently. A common way of doing this is reviewing your flashcards while you're doing something like commuting on the bus or you have some
Yeah,
downtime.
consistency.
And I have a pro
Consistency is
language
so
tip that I can
important.
guarantee you'll
So that
probably
it
not
like
hear
kind of
from
sticks in
anyone
your
else.
brain.
One of the best times I've found to study flashcards is when you're on the toilet. Like if you think about it, when you're on the toilet, you're probably just scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or something. So even if you're having a really busy day, it's basically free time anyway that you're not doing anything. So you can turn your downtime into productive time. I'm not even kidding you on how many
Damn, on
days I
that
would have missed
grind.
reviewing my flashcards if it was not for just doing them when I'm on the toilet. But yeah, I mean, so long as you're able to review your flashcards and
Never
find something
rest.
that works
Always
for you,
grind.
that's all that really matters.
Only
I should
rest when you
mention, however,
sleep.
that writing and reading wasn't really a part of my focus with this method, and I would just learn how to read naturally by texting with my language partners. But you can also absolutely supplement this method with writing and reading practice as well. And as for listening, I think that talking with natives was sufficient for me, but I would also occasionally watch anime or dramas to help with my listening too. I don't think that you should
And listen to
prioritize
music.
watching shows when you have time to actually study or do language exchanges, because I think 1 hour spent studying will provide you much more value than 1 hour just watching shows. But if you're feeling tired at the end of the day and are going to watch something anyways, I think watching something in your target language could be really helpful. For maximum efficiency, I'd recommend trying to watch something that is in a setting in real life and preferably featuring characters that are around your same age or demographic so you can learn
True.
how they speak. But yeah, so with this method, I would just repeat
J
steps 2
dramas
to 5
have
and you
been
should see
very
consistent
helpful
progress
for
so
me.
long as you're keeping with it. And I'd recommend trying to have language exchanges 2 to 3 times a week if possible. I haven't seen this exact method covered anywhere before, and it's just kind of something that I developed over time from trying out different methods to see what worked for me and what didn't. So I'm not sure if there's already a term for it, but for future reference, I'll call it the Wiscusis Winimus method. Yeah.
Wow.
Or just maybe I'll call it the tiger method for now. If you'd like to see my results with this method, you can take a look at some of my other videos as well. Videos like these take a lot of work to make, so if you feel that I provided you with value, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really helps me out a ton. Special thanks to Weston H, Vanessa P,
I don't have a Patreon, but I do have a YouTube, so subscribe if you want to see more reactions. But yeah, this is actually good advice. I use some of it when learning, but I feel I don't know if I think this is more like towards the immersion method, which is like which can like dive in head first. The immersion method, you can search it up. I'm not going to explain it here because it's going to take a while. When I learned Japanese, I did quite a few things that he did. I didn't have as many language exchanges. I didn't talk to as many people, but maybe that's just me. But I felt like I just picked up a surprising amount of things from watching, like maybe not office related J dramas, but like just watching videos in Japanese, watching just like how normal people like talk. Just like I also listen to a fuck ton of Japanese music, so my pronunciation has just become like I feel like my pronunciation is pretty good. Like my Japanese roommate says that sound like a native, so yeah, that's all I have to say. So yeah, subscribe, like. This has been the Polyglot VTuber. Not really. I'm not gonna coin myself for that. I'm more talk about like idle stuff in like another channel that I have. But again, subscribe. Bye bye.